It's now our great pleasure to introduce our chair, Dr. Hannah Bunting. Hannah is a lecturer in quantitative British politics at the University of Exeter and Sky News' election analyst, so we're very privileged to have her here. She studies voting patterns, why people do and don't vote, their trust in politicians, and how sure they are of their own preferences for a particular party. So she's basically the perfect person to have chairing tonight. We're really lucky. Here also are the two candidates ready to answer your questions, Robert Bagnall from the Green Party and Caroline Voaden from the Liberal Democrats. So please give them all a very warm welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. It's I'm really pleased to be able to be here and see so many people who are actively engaging in British democracy. I think there are people across the country who are really dissatisfied with how our democracy works, and too often that just manifests itself as disengaging altogether. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions and hearing what's important to you, and also hearing the candidates' responses to that. This constituency will be fought on new boundaries for the next election. At the moment, it's predicted to be a three-way tie. So really just 1 or 2 percentage points between the top 3 parties. What that means is it just takes a few people to stay at home on polling day to change the election result and to change who your MP is going to be. And we also know that people who are undecided, and when you ask people who they're going to vote for at the moment, there's a lot of people who are saying don't know, that my research shows that people who are undecided are less likely to vote. So this is the perfect constituency, the perfect conditions to have an initiative like this and to get more people into politics. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. I'm really pleased to hear what you all have to say. So we're going to start off with hearing from each of the candidates, and we'll just do a very short personal statement, and then afterwards a bit of a pitch of why you should vote for them. So we will start with Robert.
Thank you. Is the microphone on? Yes. My name is Robert Bagnall. I'm your Green Party candidate. My family and I moved to Torbay around about 10 years ago. My background is in the public sector and the charity sector, specifically central government, higher education, health regulation. I currently work as a freelance consultant, mainly in Whitehall, working with government departments and agencies to help them deliver public services through, given their increasingly constrained budgets. I'm also working with what's possibly the world's oldest animal conservation charity. Outside of that, I'm a science fiction writer. If you have any of the best of British science fiction anthologies, I'm in over half of them. And this morning I spent my first morning with Citizens Advice in Paignton, where I hope to start training as a volunteer advisor soon.
Excellent, thank you. And Caroline.
Hello everyone, and thank you for coming. Is that, it's on, yeah. So I'm Caroline Voaden and I live in Totnes. I'm very proud to have lived in this constituency since 2007. I am the daughter of a social worker and a climate scientist. I'm a former journalist, I was a charity CEO, and I was a member of the European Parliament. In 2019, I was elected leader of the Liberal Democrat Party in Europe. I'm here today because, like you, I do not want to be represented in Parliament by a Conservative MP for a minute longer. I would like to see this inept, dangerous, corrupt government drummed out of office so comprehensively that they will get truly lost in the political wilderness. And if we could get PR, then hopefully forever. So I'm stepping up because I want to help change the political narrative. I want to lead a movement that will end a century of Conservative MPs in South Devon, and I want to work with anyone who wants to work with me to help build a greener, fairer, better Britain.
Excellent, some strong words there. That's a great way to kick off. So we'll now ask for you to speak for around 5 minutes each for around the central question of why people should vote for you as the People's Champion. Again, Robert.
Thank you. Well, there should have been 3 of us up here, but Labour, having given us 28 billion reasons not to vote for them, have given us another one by being too scared to turn up. So let's forget about them automatically. So that leaves you with us 2. And in order to help you decide, I thought I'd give you a few of the things that we are fighting for as Greens that you won't hear from the Liberal Democrats. First of all, a wealth tax. It's time to make those who are most able to help pull their financial weight. The gulf between rich and poor is shocking, and ever since the Tory Lib Dem coalition gave us austerity, it's been getting worse. We now have almost 4 million people in this country living in deprivation, yet the 350 on the Sunday Times rich list have a combined wealth of £750 billion. It is getting so obscene that the rich are starting to lobby the government to be taxed more, because even they realise that it's pointless having, it doesn't matter how much money you've got in the bank if you can't trust an ambulance to turn up when you need one. A modest tax on wealth over £10 million would raise £16 billion for the public purse to help us fix broken Britain. Only the Greens are talking about that. That's £16 billion the other parties are too timid to get hold of. To alleviate poverty and deprivation, the Greens would bring in a universal basic income, a simple, low, regular payment to act as a financial safety net for us all. Please do not confuse it with the Lib Dems' guaranteed basic income. Ours simplifies the benefit system enormously. Theirs relies on more means testing and more bureaucracy. Given that £19 billion of benefits goes unclaimed each year because people find the system confusing and degrading, who on earth would want to put people through that assault course, to a greater degree? Answer, Sir Edward Jonathan Davey. One of the drivers of that wealth inequality is our bonkers tax system, which taxes you and me going out to work at a far, far higher rate than the money your money makes if you're lucky enough to have money to start with. The Lib Dems promise to make it fairer, but only the Greens will make it fair by having one set of rates. So it doesn't matter where your money comes from, it gets treated in the same way for tax. Doing that and closing tax loopholes wholesale will raise £30 billion for the public purse and close down that tax avoidance industry overnight that we all love to hate. The Green Party is the only party talking about nationalising privatised utilities. The Lib Dems think that the water companies will clean up their act through increased regulation. They've had decades of practice getting through loopholes, because when you privatise a public utility, the one thing you can't privatise is public service. You making a profit their number one priority, and not public service. Let's take back control. Even the majority of Tory voters want to see privatised utilities like water back owned by the public. We're on the same page when it comes to things like windfall taxes, but only the Greens are talking about a carbon tax. Make the polluter pay and rebalance our economy towards things which are good for people and good for the planet. You also won't find a single mention of oil and gas licenses in the Lib Dems manifesto, either revoking current ones or not awarding new ones. The Greens are completely unambiguous on this. No oil and gas. Talking of the economy, the Greens are the only party that recognise chasing constant and continual economic growth on a planet with finite resources is utter madness, and given the climate crisis we're facing, it can only lead to oblivion. But the Lib Dems line up with the Tories and Labour in doing just that, seeking constant economic growth. Now is the time to create a circular, sustainable economy. All of this reflects the Greens' underlying philosophy, which is, with every proposal and idea, what increases public quality of life for all, not material wealth for some. That's why I'm a Green. That's why I'd like you to vote for me as People's Champion.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Caroline.
Thank you. So we are all here today with one aim in mind, to choose the candidate who is most likely to be able to beat the Conservatives at the next general election. To elect for the first time in 101 years a non-Conservative MP for the South Devon constituency. And if we had PR, we wouldn't need to be here, but we're in a very imperfect world with an undemocratic voting system, just trying to find a way to make it work. So I'm going to share with you why I believe I am the only person who can beat Anthony Bagnall later this year. First, I would like to tell you who I am, because I would like you to have the confidence that if I'm elected later this year, you will know what I believe in and what I stand for, because those are the values that will guide me as an MP and influence the way I vote. There is a photo somewhere of me in a pram with a sash round me which says Vote Smith, out campaigning before I could talk for my dad, who became the youngest Labour councillor on a very Tory Berkshire County Council. We moved to Scotland and I grew up in a very politically aware household where my mum spent a lot of time raising money for UNICEF and Oxfam, and my dad worked with PhD students who he brought from the global south to study science with him in Edinburgh. As a journalist, I worked in the Balkans during and after the Yugoslav war, and I witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of that conflict. I came back to England, and a few years later I lost my husband Nick to cancer in 2003. After that I moved here to Devon with my two little daughters to be near a family, and I raised them alone for 8 years before I met Stuart and got remarried. My daughters are now in the midst of the broken housing system in London, with evictions, damp and mould have now become a regular feature of our family life. I ran a charity for young widows after I lost Nick. I launched and ran my own small business in Totnes for several years, and most recently I was the Chief Executive Officer of Devon Rape Crisis, before resigning last year to campaign full-time for this election. So my experience of life and work in a variety of roles has taught me the power of community, of mutual support, particularly when things get difficult, and how important it is for us to strengthen the bonds in our society. I'm really tired of living in a world where politicians drive division, foster hatred and stoke fear, where policy decisions are ultimately made by rich donors. I don't believe it has to be like that. For me, successful politics is about building community and empowering the weakest in our society to live decent lives and have a voice, to eradicate the glaring inequalities in wealth and power that are dividing our country. So my priorities are the basics: working to fix our broken public services and our NHS, to ensure that everyone in South Devon can live in a safe, secure, warm home. And I have seen so many damp homes round in Paignton that is so true, particularly in this part of the constituency. We want to ensure taxation systems are fair, so everyone pays their fair share. So we would tax income from wealth, we would close loopholes for the rich, and we would have a guaranteed basic income. And of course, we would ensure we do everything we can to address the climate emergency. So zero carbon energy, restoring nature, clean, green, efficient public transport, home insulation, climate-friendly farming, and more. And if elected, like my Lib Dem colleagues, I would support the Climate and Ecology Bill. There's a lot more policy stuff too, and I'm sure we will discuss most of it later. But now I would like to focus on how we can beat the Conservatives at the general election. I gave up my job last May, and I've been working on this campaign for 6 or 7 days a week since then. I'm literally living and breathing it. Because of all the work that I and my team of volunteers have done already, our party HQ have upgraded this seat because they know that it is one of the most winnable seats for the Liberal Democrats in the South West. That means more support, more resources, and more help. We are the only party that is taking this seat seriously as one it can win. I know I can win, but winning a general election takes a huge amount of work. There are 70,000 voters in South Devon. There are 39,000 doors. We have to knock on them and speak to as many people as possible to make sure they know that change is possible and who they need to vote for to make it happen. So we've already spoken to over 11,000 people and delivered leaflets right across this constituency several times. We're out 5 times a week with a team of canvassers that is growing all the time. We've been building my name recognition for months. We have the backing of a paid party campaign manager who's been brought into the region to help get us over the line. So what would come next? We step it up a gear, we knock on more doors, we deliver more leaflets, we run a social media campaign, we find hundreds of poster sites so the constituency goes orange. Make no mistake, the Conservatives have increased the spending limit for the general election to £35 million for just one reason, because they are the only party that can raise and spend that kind of money, and they're not going to give up without a fight. This is going to be a really tough election campaign, and the only way that we can counteract that is to work together and to work hard to build an unstoppable campaign from the ground up. And I'm already doing everything I can to make that happen. So I would really love you to join me.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we are also here to hear your questions and what's important to you. So for now, we would like you to turn to the person next to you or behind you or whoever you've come with and think about your response, perhaps to those opening remarks, and think about what you would like to ask the candidates about how they might deal with a certain issue, whatever your questions are. And then we will give around 5 minutes for you to... A bit less than 5 minutes, I'm being told. 3 minutes. It's for you to prep some questions. We do have some that people have already asked to fill the gaps, but I'm sure there's lots of burning questions that you have as well. So yeah, please chat amongst yourselves for around 3 minutes and then be prepared to ask some questions to the candidates. Okay, yes, right, we're back on. I think we will get started with some questions now. It was nice and lively, so that's good. You're obviously all very passionate and you've got some things to say. I'm going to start off with a question that was submitted at the time of booking, so for one of these events. Was it for this event specifically? Okay, right, great. The candidates have not seen the questions in advance. When it is your opportunity to ask a question, I just ask that you try and keep it nice and concise so that we can hear as many questions as possible. So this is from Richard Mitchell, and they ask, the present government is intent on lowering taxes. Does this make sense when every institution in our country is crying out for more resources? Robert?
Well, I think they're intent on appearing to lower taxes. I think the tax burden, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, I think it's up to about 37% and heading towards 38%, which is the highest tax burden possibly since the Second World War, I think. So, it's marketing. What this government is very good at doing is taking money away and then giving scraps off the table and wrapping them up with ribbons and a big bow and giving them a nice name and calling them the High Streets Fund or whatever. Any feeling that taxes are coming down, I don't think anyone feels like that. It's one of those messages from the government that just doesn't add up. So taxes are going up, but from the Green Party, the key message is the wrong people are being taxed. And you've got this tranche of people at the top of society where their tax rates are incredibly low. They have tax loopholes that they can wriggle out of. They can design their own tax to a certain extent that is utterly unfair. We're not out to sort of eat the rich. We're just out to ask them to pull their financial weight, and that could make a huge difference to the public purse.
Thank you. Caroline?
Well, I can't disagree with any of that, really. I mean, I think offering tax cuts now when our public services are in such a dire state is nothing short of an election bribe. They're trying to buy votes. I don't think it'll work. I think people can see through it. I don't think anybody's really desperate for a national insurance cut at the moment, because I think they'd rather know that they could see a dentist or a GP, or have the hip replacement that they've been waiting for in agony for the last 2 years. I think the child benefit thing in the budget today was an absolute classic symptom of who the Conservative Party is prioritising. So they maintained the 2-child cap on child benefit, which we would scrap. But they moved the limit for who can claim child benefit so that people who are earning more can get child benefit. So they're helping sort of middle earning families, which is good for them, but it's probably not the most, if I was going to change the child benefit policy, I would have gone for the 2-child benefit cap, which has been, many experts have said that would be the quickest and easiest way to lift tens of thousands of children out of poverty. Which we really, should be focusing on. I think that tax burden is the highest since the Second World War, and the national insurance cut does nothing to offset the fact that more and more people are paying higher rates of tax because they're not moving the tax bands, and we're all sort of slowly being scooped up into higher tax rates. So I think it's the wrong priority. I just think it's shameless. I think they've got to the point where they are literally trying to bribe people to vote for them because they know it's over. And we would increase all the things I said earlier. We'd be closing loopholes, we would have a wealth tax, but also we would look at taxing things like multinational corporations like Amazon, who are not paying their tax in this country. And I think one of the disadvantages of now not being in an association with our 27 nearest neighbours is that we can't work together with them to come up with international legislation that can really clamp down on sort of major tax avoidance by these multinational companies, which I think is another place we could be looking to help fill the public purse.
So could I just jump in? I think we actually heard a policy announcement from the Lib Dems there. Caroline said they'll tax wealth. Ed Davey has explicitly rejected the idea.
What we have in our manifesto is a commitment to tax income from wealth as we tax it more similarly to taxing income from employment.
Capital gains tax was introduced in 1965. That is the tax on income from wealth.
Yeah, and we would look. We're not going to sit here and pick
but
each other apart.
I just want to make sure the facts.
Doing my job for me there, Caroline. I'm going to get in there.
Just want to make sure people have the facts.
And let's hear a question from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, could you raise your hand? And we have somebody with microphones. Okay, let's go sort of right in the middle there first.
I don't actually need a microphone, you can hear me just fine.
Yeah.
I've got one big key question for both our candidates. It seems to me that the direction you're taking to win us over is policy on the Green Party's part, but personality of the candidate on the Lib Dems' part. And my issue with that is, while your policies both appeal in different ways, I'm a little concerned that if I do go Lib Dems, it may end up being the rest of the party may not be in line with Caroline's own beliefs, and that the reverse may also be true for the Green Party. So how would you answer that?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So I'm very happy to discuss policy, and we discussed a lot of policy on Saturday afternoon at the Totnes hustings. I think it's really important that we keep in mind what this process is all about. And if you look at the coalition that is the current Conservative Party, so from David Cameron across to Suella Braverman, with Lee Anderson thrown in there as well, that is a huge coalition of values and opinion. I mean, there aren't many Remainers left in there. They're pretty much all Brexiteers, but they are a large coalition. The reason the Conservative Party keep winning elections is because they understand how to win elections, because they stick together and they know that they put on a united front at election time. And I mean, it's fraying madly now. We can all see that. But up until recently, they have managed to stay together as one big bloc. Whereas on the left, we have the Lib Dems, Labour and the Greens, and we spend an awful lot of time arguing about the nuances of policy and, whether the Green policy on this is better than the Lib Dem policy, and whether, and what Labour are saying this week, maybe not next week. So you know, there are things in the Green Party manifesto that you will agree with more than in the Lib Dem manifesto. The Green Party definitely go further on taxing the rich. I fully admit that. What you are going to be electing here is an MP who's going to go to Westminster to represent South Devon. Now, if I was a betting woman, I probably would put money on the people sitting in number 10 after the election as being Labour. It looks like that's going to be the case. Robert's not in the Labour Party, I'm not in the Labour Party. If either of us get elected, the chances are quite high that we'll be on the backbenches representing South Devon. We will not be making government policy. So what you need to do is you need to think about how badly you want to beat the Conservatives at the next election, which party can do that, who can do it, and whether you have faith in them as somebody who can pretty much represent your values as you know, the people that you are living here in South Devon who want to change things. And I believe I can do that for you. I know that I can win this election. And you know, that's why my speech was not firmly based on policy, because I think there's an awful lot more than policy involved in this exercise.
It's very true. There's a lot more than policy involved. I mean, I'm not naive about the Greens' position in the polls, but at the same time, if you look at our performance in elections, and I'm thinking particularly about local elections over the last few years, we double our vote, double our seats almost every time we go out to the polls. But because we're coming from a position of weakness, I think it is important to explain what it is the Green Party stands for in terms of policies and how we're differentiated from the Liberal Democrats. So, I wanted you to know exactly what it is that I would be shouting at from the backbenches in Westminster if that is where I am sent. Loyalty plays a great part in politics. Loyalty is great for football and for family, but I really think every time people go to the polls, they ought to make sure they know what it is they're voting for. And the first past the post system, it drives parties to act strangely. It drives voters to act strangely. A lot of voters vote not for what they want, but so they can avoid what they don't want. But at the same time, without really being aware of what they might be getting. So, my message is be careful what you wish for. If you are going to go out and, if the People's Champion is not me, and it's Caroline, I think we can discount it being TBC Labour, hopefully. When you put your cross in the box for the Lib Dems, be able to tell yourself one or two things that the Lib Dems will do. Because, it's going to be a bonkers election. It may well be the world of coalitions again. It may well be that the Lib Dems or maybe the 4 Green MPs who are going to be sent there, sent to Westminster, end up being kingmakers. And it may be the case that something that's at the heart of Lib Dem policy is the thing that they bring to the coalition, and that's the deal that they get over the line to help form the next government. There are so many permutations, as you were saying, Hannah, that it's almost too close to call, I suspect, locally and, well, probably not nationally. It's the degree of majority that's difficult to call.
Well, don't get me started on that. So let's move on to, is Lou Overy here, and would they like to ask their question? Or I can ask on their behalf.
Thank you, yes. Would you accept donations from fossil fuel or armaments companies? Why or why not?
Robert?
I suspect the straight answer is no. I think it would be an odd fossil fuel or armaments company that want to give to the Green Party. Yeah, I'm trying to unpack that in my mind. It's very important to us where money comes from. We are probably the least well-funded party of the major parties. We don't have the same degree of corporate donors or trade union donors that Labour have, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't care where the money comes from. So, I suspect I'm not going to get an easier question tonight.
No, that's quite an easy one for me too. I wouldn't accept donations from either of them to my campaign. I mean, you know, if anybody in the room wants to donate to my campaign, feel free. Knock yourself out. But I shouldn't think any of you are arms traders. I think the funding of political parties in this country is absolutely just, it's in such a mess, and it is definitely one of our policies that it's part of our package of electoral reform. Political funding is a really important part of that, because you know, we can see that 25% of Conservative Party funding comes from property developers. So no surprise that we have a planning policy, a national planning policy, which is led by developers rather than led by communities. And it's a mess. And that's because every time they try and think about doing something that the house builders don't like, they get lent on, and a bit more money goes in the coffers, and they rescind the policy. And you know, one of the things that's really clear about that was during the coalition, we had a policy that every new house built would have to be built with renewable energy from as it was built, so solar panels, let's say. 2016, after we left the coalition, Persimmon Homes lent on the government and said, we can't make enough profit if you do that. So they pulled it out of they threw the policy away. So every new house that's been built since 2016 has not been built with renewable energy, apart from in Cheltenham, where the Liberal Democrats run the council, and they are now insisting that every new home built in and around Cheltenham is built with as a zero carbon home, and that's the only way the developers get permission there to build. So yeah, I think political party funding is a disgrace, and it needs to be cleaned up.
Thank you. Let's take another question from the audience. Yeah, a very keen person over here.
Hold the microphone like that.
Thank you. The previous speaker said that tonight wasn't about policies, and I think setting one policy against another is really unhelpful, because that's for the general election. What I am interested in is this process today, which I think is amazing. And I'd be interested to know, as if you were selected, how it would make a difference to you as an MP, having been elected by people who wouldn't otherwise have voted for you, and how you will represent shared values, as it says on there, because that's why I've come tonight, rather than to hear about whose policies are better.
Excellent question.
I think that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. I think it makes a huge difference. I mean, I've been knocking on doors. I mean, all politicians say this, or don't they, all the time on the radio, and it's just a bit cringeworthy. But I have been knocking on doors. There are people in the room who know I've been knocking on doors regularly for a year, and talked to lots and lots of people. And, you know, when I talk to particularly Labour voters and tell them that there isn't a Labour candidate here because it's not a seat that Labour are prioritising, because they are focusing very much on Plymouth, Moor View, you know, it's I feel quite humbled when they say, I'll vote for you because I want to get the Conservative out. I'm not a Lib Dem. I wouldn't normally vote Lib Dem. Quite a few people say I haven't voted Lib Dem since 2010. Fair enough. But I will vote for you this time, because it really matters this time, and we really need change. And I think, you know, it's almost more humbling to get the votes of people who don't really buy into your party than the votes of people who are with you because they're part of your tribe. So I really honour that. And if I was elected, I would carry on doing events like this, you know, so that I continue being the representative of the people of South Devon rather than just Lib Dem voters. That's what an MP should be doing anyway. But I'd like to think I'm a really open, approachable person, and would be, you know, happy to have public meetings and talk to people and hear what they have to say and be answerable to them.
Yes, likewise. I mean, I think there are probably very few MPs, you know, with or without this process, who have been sent to Westminster with the majority of people backing them. You know, it tends to be the largest, you know, the largest minority backing an MP. So MPs are always aware that there may be a majority of people in their constituency who didn't vote for them. You know, the fact that this process, in order to oust, you know, a Conservative when the Conservatives have been holding this seat in its various forms, or at least winning every election for over a century, I think, as Caroline says, is humbling to have, you know, been lent the votes of other parties or people who normally vote in another way to this election, which just makes the job of being your representative, that much more of an honour, and puts the onus on us not just to be a representative Devonian. Well, they've sent me to Parliament, so I'll vote for, whatever I think is the right thing and whatever the party line is, to plug back in with you. Because, how many times do politicians knock on your door when they don't want to vote? It tends to happen in the run-up to elections. So, if I am sent to Westminster as your representative, I would want to spend time, knocking on doors as well as being available within the constituency, and spending, obviously time in Westminster as well. So, that's the challenge to me, and a humbling one it is.
Thank you. Yeah, really great question there. Do we have David Cutting in the audience? Yeah, would you like to ask your question?
Hi. Given that the first line of the Memorandum of Understanding for Freeports in Devon is, this document is not legally binding, what are the panellists' views on the support of the South Hams District Council for the Freeport, which is costing us millions, for which there was no consultation? And one of the partners is Babcock International, a company involved in arms manufacturing and with contracts with Israel.
It's me to go first. Yeah, sorry, I was forgetting who was going first. In my opening remarks, I was talking about tax loopholes, and if we close those equalised tax, that's 30. I can't remember whether I said or not. I was trying to look up and not down in my notes, but that would bring £30 billion to the public purse. I put the free ports in the same category as those tax loopholes. It really is. It's not just pulling back the curtain on how government works and thinks at the moment, but it's almost pulling the curtain down, and you can see the wizard and his machinery. The Freeport, and I'm very conscious that most people here are probably from Paignton. This is outside where we're sitting at the moment. It's outside the Freeport area, but very briefly, the Freeport works. It's like creating airside areas in airports, but within Devon, around Plymouth, where you can, create businesses that don't pay tax, also freedoms on regulations. And it's just an example of the government finding wheezes to slosh around public money and then dump it into the laps of those who need it least. It forgives companies their business rates. The councils get a business rate rebate from central government, which is, after all, our money. So, if you are from Paignton, outside the Freeport area, it's still a bit of your tax that finds its way back to these companies, that way. And, with the money that's made up for, loss of business rates with the council are still obliged to spend it in the Freeports. So it absolutely stinks. And then you've got this idea of a regulatory sandbox on top. So the companies working within the Freeport can they can ask to change regulation, whether that's health and safety, employment, planning regulation, which makes no sense. I get the first part. I get the Tories' desire to make the rich richer. I don't agree with it, but I see where they're coming from. When it comes to regulation, we've either got it right outside, in which case the regulation should apply within the Freeport, or we've got it wrong outside, so let's rethink it. But, the laws of physics and logic don't change in the Freeport. Why should regulation? So the whole thing stinks. And the very fact, as you say, David, that the first line of the Memorandum of Understanding says this is not legally binding, it is perfectly possible for the Liberal Democrat-led South Hams Council to step away from it because, it stinks.
So thank you, David, for your question. I hear the concerns around the Freeport, and I share the concerns around the fact that it's giving big businesses a way to operate without paying tax, which reduces the tax take for the country at a time when that's the absolute opposite of what we should be doing. And one of the other concerns is that it displaces jobs. So lots of jobs could be created in the Freeport area around Plymouth, but they may move from elsewhere in the area. And also, you know, it's just basically a right-wing deregulatory sort of Trussonomics type operation, which the Liberal Democrats don't support and, you know, would never have brought in. I would never have supported it. My party generally don't support freeports. But what we need to remember is that that freeport was created by a Conservative administration. So we had a Conservative government, a Conservative-run Devon County Council, and a Conservative-run South Hams District Council, who made sure that all the documentation was signed, sealed, and delivered before they lost the election last May. So we inherited the freeport when we took over South Hams District Council. We don't believe that it's the right way to go about trying to boost the economy. However, we do have a representative, a Liberal Democrat representative from South Hams District Council sitting in the boardroom on the board of the Freeport, and he sits there alongside a Labour representative of Plymouth City Council, because our belief is that if South Hams District Council walk away from their involvement in the Freeport doesn't disappear, the Freeport stays there. Okay? Only an Act of Parliament can dissolve that Freeport. Us walking away from it doesn't collapse the Freeport and make it magically disappear. So we believe, as responsible public servants who are trying to make the South Hams a good place to live, we believe it's much better that we have somebody in the room who is part of all those conversations and who is helping to make the policy that drives the direction of the Freeport. One of the things that the three council representatives have oversight of, so that's Plymouth, South Hams and Devon County, is they can overrule any application for jobs to be created in the Freeport if they are being lost elsewhere. So if, for example, you have an engineering company in Paignton or Dartmouth or, you know, Newton Abbot that wants to move into the Freeport and those jobs would be lost elsewhere, those three councillors on that board can say, no, this is not what this Freeport was set up to do. So we just believe that it's better to be in the room, you know, in the same way that I believe that it was better for us to remain in Europe, because, you know, it's not perfect and it's not ideally what we would want, the Freeport, but if we're not in the room being part of those conversations, we can't influence them, we have no say over them. So whether the Freeports remain under a Labour government is yet to be seen, but that is the situation as it stands.
Thank you. Let's take another question from the room. Lovely. How about over here, please? Oh.
Just wait for a mic.
Sorry, I should be more direct with my...
And hold it up.
Thank you. My question is probably a little bit more targeted towards the Liberals. As a floating voter over the years, I have voted Liberal. And more recently in supporting the Tories in the last election. But I'm a Brexiteer, and the policy very clearly for Liberals is that, you know, you want to rejoin Europe. How could you make someone who is a Brexiteer actually, you know, have the opportunity to support yourself? It is a little frustrating Labour aren't here, but I'd obviously be interested in your answer to that. And also, I don't know what the Greens' policy is on Brexit and what their approach is. That's my question.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. So I don't hide the fact that I was a member of the European Parliament and I got involved in politics because of Brexit. I'd lived in Europe for many years. I speak lots of languages. I had relatives in Europe. I felt that, you know, we don't need to revisit the whole Brexit argument, but for me, I was on the Remain side. This election is not an election that's going to be fought around Brexit, and it's not something that we are talking about particularly loudly because Brexit is not on the agenda at the moment. I mean, you know, we are in such a mess in this country that we have much more important things to be focusing on right now, which is particularly the NHS and the cost of living crisis. Our manifesto does say that we would like to rejoin the single market as a first step. I mean, you know, rejoining the EU, I think, is a very long-term plan. You know, I have no idea how long that might take, even if it was going to be the policy of the incoming government, which I don't think it will be. But I believe that rejoining the single market would give an immediate boost to all the businesses in this country that are really, really struggling to recruit staff, to export to Europe. You know, I constantly meet people who are really struggling with their businesses, and the whole staffing thing is a really big one, especially in the hospitality and the care sectors where we're desperate for people. So I'm not going to win you over on the Brexit argument. All I'm going to be able to say is that it's not really, I don't believe it's really working for the country. I don't think we've seen the massive Brexit benefits that we were promised. I certainly haven't seen any. And I think the most important thing to say is that that's not what we're fighting this election on. You know, we need to improve our public services, and you know, we need to start improving how we deal with our children. You know, education and care and childcare and early years learning and special educational needs. It's such a mess because it's not been a priority. You know, that's a really important focus for the incoming government. And you know, single market, rejoin the EU. I think it's a long-term goal. I hope that wouldn't put you off voting Liberal Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of questions to differentiate the Lib Dems and the Greens, this probably isn't a great candidate, because a lot of what Caroline talked about, you know, I completely sign up to. We're probably a little more, you know, pro-Europe. I think our policy does talk about rejoining Europe when the the economic circumstances and the political will is there, and also underlining that is, you know, making the political circumstances and the economics work to rejoin. I mean, when I talk to somebody who was pro-Brexit, I want to find out how they think it's gone. You know, have the benefits come through? Every time we think about that red bus, I have to Google it to. Yeah, did it really say 350 million? Was it a week?
Every week.
A week. 350 million a week. And then I stopped looking at the picture and it must have said a month or a year. No, it's a week. I don't believe we got those benefits at all, but I'd love to hear from somebody who, you know, maybe there are people in a particular niche where Brexit helped them. One other sort of Green Party policy, and it was only really when I went through the sort of policy detail that I learnt this, that this wasn't on my radar. Caroline will know all this because she's worked in Europe. We may have left the European Union, but we didn't leave the European Council. And it would be embarrassing to leave the European Council because it was set up by the Treaty of London. And it predates the European Union, and it's the European Council that oversee the European Court of Human Rights. I mean, that's why the ECHR still applies to us. We are still involved in it. And the Greens have a policy of making the European Council stronger and have greater say in European matters, and almost getting back into Europe through the back door that way. So, you know, we are firmly pro-European.
Thank you. Mike Reynolds, are you in the audience and available to answer your question? There we are. Ask your question.
He's going to answer it himself.
Hi. People are pretty frightened about immigration. Should they be?
No, I really don't think so. Anyone in the audience who's sort of my generation will remember war films that used to get on Sunday afternoons, and, you know, if you had a character in there who wasn't meeting the Geneva Convention, you kind of knew they were a wrong 'un. You know, there are obligations we have under the Geneva Convention and various other conventions that we are at risk of not meeting when it comes to immigration and refugees and asylum seekers. And when people shout at me on 4th Street in Brixham, I'll vote for anyone who gets rid of the immigrants, yes, that probably is untrammeled racism, but I think underneath that is a feeling that people are in the queue ahead of them for public resources and public services. And what people are really complaining about is that, you know, the public services that people, you know, our own people are getting are probably not, you know, up to what they'd expect or what they think asylum seekers are getting through, you know, the Geneva Convention. Our country has always relied on immigrants. I'm a second-generation immigrant. My mum emigrated from Finland in the mid-1960s. I have to keep telling myself I'm a second-generation immigrant. I only speak English. I've never lived anywhere other than within Great Britain. But you know, she came and worked in the NHS in a geriatric hospital as a nursing orderly because Britain didn't recognise her economics degree. Thank you, Britain, in the 60s. So, you know, Britain has always relied on immigration, and that one thing that never gets thrown into the immigration argument is the birth rate. I thought it was 1.75 per woman, which is how it's measured. BBC News the other day said it was 1.65. So if it was left to us, we'd be shrinking. So immigration, Britain needs immigration. It's not something to be scared of.
I think the immigration debate is something that has been whipped up by this government that is just stoking these culture wars because they want you to focus on what's going on over here rather than looking at what's going on over here. So they want us all to look at the people coming over in the boat rather than looking at the fact that our hospitals are falling apart and we have no dental service anymore, which is nothing to do with immigration. It's to do with you know, all the stuff we've been talking about, like, you know, political priorities and lack of funding and stuff. I think we do need immigration. We need immigrant workers, and there are thousands of people. It says here there are about 1,200 medically qualified refugees are recorded on the British Medical Association's database. And it costs £25,000 to support a refugee doctor to practice in the UK, whereas training a new doctor is estimated to cost 10 times that, £250,000. So we could actually be doing far better, you know, making, you know, that's an awful way to say it, making more use of the refugees who are coming over. But, you know, there are lots of really skilled people coming over who could be a really valuable part of our workforce if they were allowed to. I think there are lots of different things in the immigration debate. I think this whole thing about illegal immigrants is really toxic. There is no such thing as an illegal immigrant. The government shut all safe and legal routes for people to seek asylum here in the UK, so they have to come by boat because there's no other way they can get here. And about 75% of the people who arrive in that way are granted asylum eventually, but there is a backlog of over 100,000 asylum seekers because we have a completely inept and useless Home Office who have failed to process them. So, you know, Liberal Democrat policy is that we would try and address the asylum. I'll have to read this, I'm afraid, because it's wordy. But that we would address the asylum backlog. That we want a fair, effective immigration system. We want to scrap the hostile environment, and that, you know, we would invest in officers, training and technology to try and get that backlog processed. We do believe in speeding up asylum decisions. We also agree in speeding up returns. So if people aren't given asylum, then we speed up the returns. But we also want to lift the ban on asylum seekers working. If they are here waiting for more than 3 months for a decision, we should allow them to work, because we cannot expect anybody to live on £7 a day. And seeing, you know, refugees who've come here because they're escaping horrors at home to then be sleeping on the streets. In Plymouth, when people are granted asylum in Plymouth, I think they now have, well, all over the country, but I know it's happening at the Red Cross in Plymouth, they have 24 hours or something to get out of their accommodation and find somewhere to live. I mean, you know, hello? There is no accommodation. It's not like an asylum seeker can just go and knock on the door somewhere and get a nice flat. So they end up on the streets in tents. And I just think it's a shocking, appalling way to treat our fellow human beings. You know, we have one planet, we all live on it. If the worst happened here and we all had to run away and seek asylum, you know, over the water, we would want to be welcomed and treated like human beings. And I think we really need to keep sight of that and just stop the fear-mongering, and just be grown up and sensible about it. People are always going to move. People have always moved. We need to find a way to manage that so that it is decent and efficient, and that people who can stay here can actually build a life.
Thank you very much. Yeah, in the scarf here, sorry, I think I thought I pointed to you before and there was confusion, so let's hear from you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering, if you win the primary, when you win the primary, what are your plans, what are your next steps, and how are you going to win the election?
Thank you. So if I were to win the primary, every week we have groups of people. We have a group in Kingsbridge, a group in Totnes. We're building in the process of building 6 teams. So South Brent, Kingsbridge, Totnes, Brixham, Dartmouth, and 5 teams. And Paignton kind of slightly comes under Brixham, but we might, I mean, hopefully at some point we'll have a whole Paignton team up here. So that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I've spent a year doing, recruiting new volunteers, embedding them in our teams, trying to get things going in different places. And so, you know, any new people that came on board, we would get them involved in those teams of people and help us with the campaign. So you know, it's a typical Liberal Democrat campaign. One of the things that is happening at the moment is that the mainstream media is talking about Labour, Tory, Sunak, Starmer. You know, that's the debate. So most people who are not engaged in politics like you are, they just, the natural assumption is, oh, if I don't want the Tory, I have to vote Labour, regardless of where they live, because that's what they hear. And that's, you know, if people aren't really engaged, they just kind of get this vague message over the radio and on TV that's, oh, if it's not Tory, it must be Labour. So it's quite a big job for the Lib Dems, and, you know, would be the same for the Greens, to get the message out that actually the challenger here is the Liberal Democrat. If you don't want the Tory, you need to vote Lib Dem, because Labour can't win here because they have no campaign and they don't have a candidate. So it's kind of a basic to have a candidate. So our campaign is door knocking. It's getting leaflets through doors. It's talking to people. It's engaging with people. It's raising the profile. It's making sure that people know what they need to do, and that takes a huge amount of people. We have about 300 square miles here. We go from Holne on the Moor down to Brixham, so it's huge, and I spend my entire life sort of driving around the constituency. So we do more of that, and we make sure that people are talking to people and getting the word out and raising more money to try and counteract that Tory spend. But it's a really vibrant campaign, and it's really fun, and people are joining all the time. I think we've joined up 5 or 6 people this week, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, Caroline's just explained how politics works at the, at the coalface, when you're not standing outside the Houses of Parliament being interviewed for Sky News or the BBC or what have you. It's about knocking on doors, looking voters in the eye, talking to them about what their important issues are, listening to them, and, you know, winning votes one household or one door at a time. So, you know, we've been doing the same, knocking on doors, posting literature. You know, we've got our flyers out there. So, you know, when, you know, we were talked to initially about the South Devon Primary, the prize on offer, if you like, is, you know, through the endorsement of the primary, to bring a small army of supporters, you know, to the cause of whoever wins the position of People's Champion. So, you know, there will be an increase to our, you know, our army in terms of doors that can be knocked and voters talked to. And obviously, you know, I wouldn't expect, you know, you guys to be suddenly fully immersed in Green Party policies or the manifesto or whatever. You know, what I want you guys talking to voters about is why you've chosen the Green candidate as the People's Champion in order to win their votes over.
Thank you. Okay, we've got just under sort of 20 minutes left for questions, so I'm going to ask for the next lot if we could try and be as concise as possible in answers so that we can hear as many as possible. Yeah, here at the front. Yep, microphone coming.
Yes. Can we come to what I think is the primary issue? Not just South Devon's primary issue, and that's climate change. And I want to know what the 2 candidates think of oil, gas, non-renewable sources and also the water, clean water. What do you think can possibly be done about that, about those things? Because nothing I've heard of anywhere is addressing climate change.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is the existential crisis that we are facing. The Green Party are absolutely unambiguous. We will cancel oil and gas licences in the North Sea. No more will be awarded. We need to move towards, you know, this is all the stuff that I said in my opening 5 minutes. You know, as long as you chase economic growth on a planet with finite resources, the end point is not worth contemplating. You know, there is enough, our economy is big enough for everyone's need, not for everyone's greed. So let's stop chasing economic growth. Even if economic growth was a rising tide that lifted all boats, you know, it's not. The vast majority of money generated by GDP growth goes to the richest already. So, you know, putting aside the climate crisis, it's bonkers, yeah. But, you know, with the climate crisis, it makes it, you know, even worse. You know, we need a circular, sustainable economy, and, you know, the fundamental Green Party philosophy, looking at every proposal, every policy, every decision, does it increase human happiness and, you know, societal good, or is it about putting money in people's pockets? And I think you'll have a very different world if every policy decision went through that lens.
Thank you for the question, and yes, I agree. It is it's often the elephant in the room, isn't it? It's not talked about nearly enough, and it is the biggest threat we face. And I think probably because it is so huge, that's why politicians have put it off for so long, because they just can't quite grasp the enormity of it. And we've got to grasp it. Environmental policy runs through every page of our manifesto. So every single area of policy involves, you know, has a green element to it. So whether that's building zero carbon homes in our planning policy, or transport policy is all about trying to get people out of cars and into public transport. I mean, in a rural area like this, it's really hard, but I'm really passionate about transforming rural transport so we can get people out of cars, you know, and that means massive investment in things like electric buses. You know, it's never going to be profitable, but we've got to make a decision as a country. So I saw an advert the other day there's a new train that's going from Paris to Barcelona overnight, €41 to go from Paris to Barcelona on a train, and it costs what, 100 quid to get to London from here. I mean, it's just, you know, we need a major rethink in this country about transport. But apart from that, we did, you know, when we were in coalition, we pushed a lot of green policies forward. So we doubled offshore wind. That was Liberal Democrats did that. The Liberal Democrats who've taken over South Hams District Council have already put £500,000 a year into their budget for environmental policy. So it's something that we really believe in. You know, we've got a commitment to have 80% renewable energy by 2030, doubling nature by 2050. So that's about doubling species and doubling the area that is protected for nature. So there's lots and lots and lots of different policies, and I think it needs to be front and centre of every single piece of policy that's passed from now on. I mean, we can't avoid it anymore. You know, and water companies we would take out of private hands and make them public benefit companies, so they would be not for profit.
Thank you.
As with the Greens.
Is Lindsay Kendrick here and available to ask their question?
Here. Just get my question. So my question is, what is your plan for social care and mental health services, and where will the money come from?
Okay, social care. So our plan for social care is free social care for adults, but not including the accommodation portion of it. So the actual personal care would be paid for. We don't believe that it's fair to have a distinction between somebody who has cancer and somebody who has dementia, for example. You know, one is paid for and treated very well by the NHS, and the other you're kind of left on your own. One of the problems about social care at the moment is it's funded by local government. As you're probably aware, local government funding has been cut annually for decades, and they just can't afford it. We have an older population, so we have more pressure on social care. So one of the things that the Liberal Democrats, there's lots of policies that would, by their nature, relieve the pressure on local authorities, so there would be more money. So, you know, completely transforming the way special educational needs and schools and education are funded, and the way that is managed, so that doesn't all fall on local authorities, which then has a knock-on effect on how much money there is for social care. But I think we need a complete it needs to be completely overhauled, you know, and governments have avoided the social care issue for too long. We also have a lot of policies around carers, so increasing the minimum wage for carers and encouraging more people into the caring profession, because we know that we can't always rely on families. We need to have professionals doing it. And one of the things I see in this area is that we have an awful lot of people who come down here to retire because it's such a lovely place to live, but they don't always bring their family with them. So we do actually have huge pressure on social care, particularly in a constituency like this, where we have a lot of older people who then need to be looked after by the state. So I hope that goes some way to answer your question.
Yeah, on care, the green approach would be to put care on the same footing as health in the National Health Service. So, you know, it's free at the point of need. You know, you're not paying for it depending, or, you know, relating to your ability to pay. I don't think we're proposing a national care service. I think Labour were at one point talking about a national care service. I think it would still sit with local authorities, but, you know, it's about putting care and health on the same footing. In terms of how to pay for it, I mean, I'll go back to the £16 billion wealth tax, £30 billion raised by closing tax loopholes and equalising tax. And I mean, I'm sure it's probably not earmarked for this, but the carbon tax, making the polluter pay, that's much more about things like £145 billion investment on making homes better insulated, but, you know, that all contributes to the overall budget. So, you know, we are identifying where this wodge of money will come from, and then when you've got universal basic income thrown in there, that to me is the nearest thing to a silver bullet that a politician can deliver. So think about people, you know, delivering unpaid care. You know, I've read about, you know, 13, 14-year-olds caring for family members. Okay, universal basic income won't apply to a 13, 14-year-old, but you know, people delivering care within a home, within the household, universal basic income, there's no means testing, there's no what is your circumstances. For unpaid carers, and there are tens of thousands throughout the country, UBI can really make a difference to them.
Thank you. Lovely. You can raise your hands. Yeah, we'll go down the middle again, please. Sorry, the most difficult to get a microphone to. Yeah, up the top. Yeah.
So it was just, Caroline, it was a specific question regarding the previous question, I suppose. I feel like you failed to talk about licensing, new license, oil and gas license. I'm just wondering if that is an omission, a deliberate omission, or is that, yeah. And I have, that's a very specific, quick question. I have a more general question, but
it wasn't a deliberate omission. There isn't a line in our pre-manifesto that says no new oil and gas licences. Personally, I wish there was. There still might be. I don't know. I haven't seen our election manifesto, but certainly not something I support. We do have a commitment to no new coal.
And there's a thing called the private members bill, isn't there? I was just wondering if you were in the House of Commons, what would be your private members bill, the two?
Okay, I'll tell you, it's probably not the first thing I would take to Parliament, but it's something that I feel quite strongly about, and it may seem completely random, but at the moment you can't get a zebra crossing until you can prove that there have been accidents. So basically you have to wait until a child is almost killed before the county council will consider your request for a zebra crossing. And we have 2 places in Totnes where I know it's going to happen, and but we can't do anything about it because there hasn't been an accident that is serious enough to require a zebra crossing. I think that's madness. I think communities should be able to say, you know, we have 50 or 100 children crossing this road every day to go to school and back. We need a zebra crossing. That feels to me like it would be a little win for communities that might make them feel a bit safer. It's also the kind of non-controversial thing that might get through as a private member's bill as well.
I honestly don't know what my private member's bill will be, but I do know it will come from listening to constituents.
Thank you. Okay, let's take another question from the room, because the one I've got left on here is a big one. So let's try and get some small ones before we... yeah, gentleman here in the orangey red.
Is that on? Yeah. Okay, well, my question refers to the housing crisis in this country, which is severe, particularly in the rental sector. And I think a lot of the problem, particularly in the southwest, is caused by landlords taking their properties out of the normal longer-term rentals into short-term, more profitable holiday lets, and maybe just a few weeks a year, and they make more in those few weeks than they would for a 6-month letting. And I know there's been some tinkering in the budget today with the tax concessions for holiday lets, but I think it's still going to be a problem. And I'd just like to know what your thoughts are on resolving that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to resolving the housing crisis, you know, that there is an issue particularly locally over Airbnbs and holiday lets. I mean, it's an area that we would legislate, and I think we're, you know, there's probably nothing much between us in terms of getting rid of any tax incentives for keeping properties vacant, and I fully support the fact that Torbay Council is bringing in a sort of 200% council tax, you know, increase or 200% council tax for vacant properties. I mean, in terms of turning around the much bigger housing issues, you know, we do, I think both of us have housing targets. You know, I'm reluctant to say a house building target, because the Green Party's emphasis is much more on bringing properties back into a usable state, so vacant properties, derelict properties. We'd also, you know, we'd get rid of right to buy. We'd give councils greater powers over rent controls on private landlords. And, you know, green councils have set council rents relative to average wages within their areas. So, you know, those kind of things help. You know, one, we need to bring more council housing into the stream. So, you know, building and then not giving council tenants the right just to buy them. So keeping that social housing stock and keeping the rents affordable, you know, through greater controls, and also giving, making sure those houses are better insulated, so tenants do not have big energy bills to pay if it's a well-insulated house. And as I said earlier, you know, we are looking at committing £145 billion over 10 years to insulate homes, and compelling landlords to make sure that the homes they give people are well insulated and not full of black mould and leaking roofs and things. You know, we have some of the worst housing stock in Europe. We want to turn that round.
Thank you. Caroline.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief, because I can see the glances. I agree with a lot of what Robert said. I mean, the second home issue here and the holiday lets issue is really bad. So a couple of weeks ago, there were over 1,000 properties in Brixham on Airbnb, and there were 9 on Rightmove. So that just gives an idea of how bad it is. And people in Brixham say all the time that there's just nowhere to rent. I mean, the estate agents have said to me it's impossible. We need to completely change the tax system. So I think that's the only way to do it. It's really hard to put that genie back in the bottle. So it needs to be things like make tax disincentives for short-term lets, but also maybe making it harder to do, so there are more regulations around fire safety and that kind of thing for Airbnbs, in the way that normal bed and breakfasts and hotels have to comply with all that legislation. Airbnbs don't have to comply with any of it. So maybe that would be a way of of making people less keen to chuck families out and put their houses on Airbnb. But I also think that there's also something about, you know, when the interest rates went shooting up after Liz Truss decided to play roulette with our economy, I don't know if anybody here got a raise in the interest rate on the savings that they had in their bank account, if anybody has any savings. You know, there's something about the fact that property seems to be the only way you can make money in this country, because you can't sort of make a decent income from other investments. And I think we really need to think about that as well. You know, maybe there's nobody in this room this applies to, but for people who are multiple landlords and investing in property as a business, as a way to make serious money, maybe we need to make sure that they can get a good return by investing in other places, investing in green technology, for example, rather than investing in domestic housing.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we're going to finish with Amanda Makin, if you are here.
How can you restore trust in politics?
I told you it was a big one.
By doing things like this. I think, you know, one of the reasons I've got into politics is because I think we need more normal people in politics. We need people who've had other careers, who've done other jobs, who've got real world experience. I think career politicians don't help build the brand of politicians. So I'm really proud of the cohort of Liberal Democrat candidates who are standing at the next election, you know, who've done all sorts of different jobs. You know, they come from health, we've got a vet, we've got, you know, an economist, we've got people who have lots of real world experience. And I know that all the experience I've had, you know, working in the European Parliament, okay, that is politics as well, but you know, running rape crisis taught me more than I would ever want to know about the situation with sexual violence, with the mental health of girls in schools, you know, the lack of mental health services available in Devon, you know, really, really shocking stuff that I wish I could unknow, but I will never unknow what I learned there. And I think bringing that into politics and being able to use that experience helps build trust. I think things like this, where you can talk to us and just see that who we are as people, I think that's really important. And you know, not trying to sort of pretend that we're someone we're not. You know, it's just me, and you might not agree with everything I've said, but you know, I'm a worker, I'm a grafter, I've always worked, I have raised a family, I've lived a normal life, you know, I've struggled with lots of the things that people have struggled with, big things and small things, and you know, I want to bring all of that, all of me as a person, as a woman, to the job of being your MP, and hopefully do it in a really good way.
Yeah, I think trust when it comes to politicians, you know, trust doesn't suddenly become something different than it is in another context, in a family or a work context. You know, you trust people when they say what they mean what they say, do what they promise to do, don't have, you know, multiple personalities, so when they're talking to somebody else they'll be promising X, and talking to, you know, somebody on the other side of the room they promise Y. It's just that simple stuff, you know. Mean what you say, be honest, be genuine. I'm not quite sure how else to do it.
One other thing, yeah. When you go to Westminster as an MP, to vote the way you say you're going to vote when you're in the constituency, rather than saying one thing down here and then trotting off to Westminster and voting another way.
And you know, from the point of view of a politician wanting to get everyone's vote, it's very tempting, you know, when you're on individual doorsteps to, if not promise what the individual is wanting, at least be, you know, warm and nodding to you know, what they want. But you know, there comes a point where you stand up and say, you know, there will be things that you don't agree with me on, and these are them, and just being straight. So you know, I don't quite know how to do it other than you know, doing what I promise, saying what I mean, and meaning what I say.
Thank you. in the academic world, the research and the evidence, trust in politics happens when politicians are honest, transparent, have integrity and competence. So I think you summed that up quite nicely. That's the academic version, and that's the politician
I think you summed
version.
it up better.
Okay, thank you. I'm really sorry that we couldn't hear everybody's questions, but we need to leave enough time for you to be able to vote. So I will pass over in just a second, but I wanted to take a moment to say that the Conservatives have just received their worst polling result from Ipsos Mori. So when when Ipsos asked, who would you vote for if a general election were tomorrow? That's the usual question. It was only 20% of people who said that they were going to vote Conservative. That is lower than any time since Ipsos have been asking that question, which was in the 1970s. So it's lower than even Liz Truss's brief tenure when people were asked that question then. But I would urge you to not take that for granted, because as soon as the starting gun of an election campaign takes off, those polls will move. It could be in a positive way, it could be in a negative way. We can't see into the future, no matter how much sort of research we have. But the election is not a done deal. So please, however you are going to vote, tell your friends, neighbours, get them to come to these events, because the only way that any change will happen is by people getting involved in politics. So I will now pass over for the logistics side of the voting.
Right, I hope you feel that you've been part of something really quite groundbreaking, because the papers are really beginning to pick up on this and realise that there's a little revolution happening in Devon. You know, and come Newsnight, I don't know how many of you remember the Portillo moment, when he stood there and he fully expected to win, and he didn't. We are going to have a Portillo moment on steroids, because nobody expected this seat to go any other way than the way it's gone for 100 years. But you guys are going to make the difference. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask you just to wait a moment. You're going to be called out to go and register your vote, to rank the candidates 1, 2, and 3. If you don't want to vote for all of them, that's fine. Just put 1. Please don't put a cross or a tick. Put a number, and then it'll be placed in a ballot box. We're not counting any of the votes until after the very last event in Brixham, but we will know how town halls voted independently, separately. But it'll all be counted up on the 16th. And then we'll let you all know what the result is. And then it's up to us to make as many people across this constituency as possible aware that if they want some change, they've got to get behind that people's champion. Tell everybody to vote. We've got to send a big message. We can't just win this on just a few, and on a low turnout. It's got to be a really big turnout that makes it absolutely clear that change is what is wanted. So, I'm going to just very quickly hand over to the candidates to give you one final word. And then, before we do, I just want to say a big thank you to you for coming, to the tech team, to all our stewards, to the candidates for making themselves available for what's going to be quite a long haul, because we're only 2 into 7, and particularly to Hannah, who's come down here to host this today, and who will also be chairing the Brixham session. If we could just, I know it's a bit back to front and everything, but if we could just say a big thank you to Hannah for doing that. And now, just before you get to go up and vote, a quick word, a final word from our 2 candidates. Thank you.
You guys are facing something of a paradox. In order to decide for whom to vote tactically, it is absolutely vital that you don't vote tactically. In order to decide what you collectively think, you must vote based on what you individually think, not what you think other people are thinking, or indeed how votes have gone in the past. So if the things that I've talked about, looking at every decision and policy through a lens of what increases the quality of life rather than material wealth, you know, the things I'll be fighting for, things like a wealth tax, so we can all, you know, the rich can pull their financial weight and help build broken Britain back up again. If these things chime with you, then please vote Green. If it turns out you and I are in the minority and you end up casting your vote for another party at the end of the day, so be it. But when the dust is settled on the election, it may be the case that you want to come and spend more time with the Greens. We're a party that relies on the energy and enthusiasm of our members. Every election we go to, we increase our vote. Maybe you'd like to be involved in the one after this.
We're here to choose somebody who can actually win this election, and I hope that I've shown you what we are already doing to win the election, the confidence we have as a party that we can win this election. I mean, we've talked a lot about predictions. There are polls coming out now which are predicting this as a Lib Dem win. And with the best will in the world, and this is absolutely no reflection on their policies at all, and the way that Robert has learnt them so comprehensively, I'm so impressed. But the Green Party have only ever elected one MP, and our system is stacked against them. I think we need to be practical, we need to be realistic, and as you go and cast your vote tonight, I'd like you to do one thing. While you're waiting to cast your vote, I'd like you to think about election night. And I'd like you to think about us standing on the platform beside Anthony. And I'd like you to think about how pleased he's going to look if he's won this election by 1,000 votes. And think about how awful that would feel for all of you, but more importantly, for us having not won the election. And then I'd like you to think about how brilliant it would feel if this had worked, and if we turned the tide on 101 years of Conservative MPs, and if you have a new MP going to Westminster who can stand up for South Devon. I believe that's me. I believe I'm the only one that can do it, and I hope you all back me as the people's champion.
Thank you very much. Right, we're going to vote now, so get ready to be called. Thank you.
We need music now.
Yeah.